Everyone. Sam, do you want to lead with the agenda?
Sure. Yeah, hello. I hope you had a fun and restful spring break. We had a fun time all getting together in Las Vegas. Um, and I see you guys have been hard at work. Very exciting. Um, Jean is not able to join us this week, but she had a couple of read-only things on the agenda. Starting off at the top, um, for being blocked in anything, there are a couple of things Gina put in. One of them is read only, you can read it later. It's just a note, I think, for me in Martian so that we can access the recruiting thing. It sounds like recruiting is going to take a little longer than was expected. There was also some discussion of this in the Slack channel. Um, Anything else you all are blocked on, need advice on, need to write it about, whatever. I will take your silence and remain leader doesn't know. Okay. So let's move on to the next discussion topic. Some successes you've had since our last check-in. Can you talk a little bit to these?
Yeah, I guess I can start. So throughout the retreat and our break, we were able to conduct 6 direct user interviews and across both engineering managers and product managers. And we were able to synthesize all of that through an affinity diagram and mapping. And we're also able to come down to 3 focus areas that we found a lot of overlapping pain points for. So I can just quickly touch on that. And yeah, actually four big areas. So one was the repetitive task. A lot of our interviewees addressed that they found assigning epochs to tickets or iterations to tickets to be quite repetitive. In addition with that, it was also very difficult for them to figure out dependencies. And we figured there could have been some potential for AI to come in for automation in this case. And further, there were some pain points in the area of labels in terms of team members finding difficulty with understanding what labels might stand for or how to move it around. And past users have also addressed finding that there was a steeper learning curve in terms of using the labels. And in addition, assigning them were tedious at times and that there were a lot of labels to keep track of. And another area was pre-labels, which was that some issues were not pre-labeled and the most repetitive task was adding to these labels. And it would be helpful to label issues in some way based on description or context. And another area was on work allocation, which falls under kind of figuring out how much to give to each specific individual and having to reference back and forth across the board. And yeah, it was also difficult for some of our interviewees to find team members based on like seniority levels and how much they can keep track of throughout the project. Yeah, but those are the 4 big focus areas we were able to narrow down to across all of our interview findings. I don't know if any of the other team members wanted to speak a bit more specifically on their specific interviewee.
Yeah, and then I know that you guys are working on something that improves navigation, and there are like big pain points on that. One of our interviewees did mention something about kind of challenging to transition between like child epic and like a more specific issue, but only one person mentioned that so far. Maybe because we didn't ask like a super targeted question on that, but that's something that was mentioned. And one of the issues that we have with these findings is that we interview a bunch of people with different roles. So sometimes like we didn't dive too deeply into each pain point. And even though like labels and kind of like pre-labeling them with automation was kind of mentioned. Professor was kind of asking us to see if there's like other problems that we can tackle as well.
Can I ask you a question about the way that your affinity map is laid out here? Are the colors of the sticky notes significant? Are they like,
Yes.
oh, they're individuals?
Yeah.
You might want to consider a way of grouping some way of easily seeing kind of what category of user or what user type the individual respondents fall into as well, to see if there's any strong correlation between a like user type and one of these categories of feedback or one of these types of feedback.
Mhm.
But also, I'm not sure. Let's see, an engineer, product owner, tech lead, a software developer, developer, backend. Okay, so yeah, only one of them is really kind of like a PM type person. This is a great affinity map, by the way. I just want to echo what Jen said in the section. Nice job on this.
Yeah, and then the other thing that we're thinking about is potentially narrowing down the workflow and just do another round of interviews with like a different set of questions and maybe diving deeper into specific pain points. So yeah, like if you look at our agenda, like today, then we had a conversation with Amanda and she suggested that we can focus on the PM persona with a more specific workflow, because like the ideal outcome would be that we can kind of work on design that something that's like not too complex on the back end and has the potential of being shipped without kind of disrupting the like current product roadmap. And she thinks that one of the highest impact workflow for her as a PM was actually identifying work that is in jeopardy of meeting planned delivery timing. Yeah, I guess we have questions about like whether you guys are like familiar with this, whether you guys think this is like a good workflow for us to tackle. And her rationale for that was also like in the document, like if you guys want me to kind of go over that or you guys want to read it.
It might be important for the recording to briefly summarize it, but I read it before the call.
Mhm. Yeah,
You know, I
so
think that. Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
no, sorry, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, I think that determining what work is at risk of falling behind or not meeting goals or targets is not usually what people use a Kanban board for. That is probably an important concern of someone who's like running a Scrum team. I don't know. I guess what I want to emphasize to you is that like you know, you guys don't work for us, right? You're students doing the project. We're advising you. You're doing a project about the product that we work on. Um, you know, don't be swayed too much by like our internal users, because our actual users may be thinking a different way. And don't be too concerned about like, is this something the GitLab team can really work on or whatever. You know, do a project that you think is a good real improvement for real users. So don't feel too hemmed in or too like, oh God, we got to change everything based on this feedback. You trust the data, trust what you're learning from users about what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think like our issue right now is how can we, I guess, like kind of define a research goal right now and just kind of dive deeper into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, of the people who you've talked to so far who are on your affinity map, they're mostly engineers. If you're senior engineers, so they may be kind of more engaged in like divvying up work, like kind of seeing things through, some more kind of procedural stuff. I think looking, you know, if you're able to talk to some more people who are in a product management role for that, that may help you kind of see where there are PM specific clusters in that affinity map. But I think kind of looking at places where you're like, okay, everybody has problems with this. maybe things where there's an opportunity to improve it for, for multiple user types, including the PM, right? So if you get super narrow about like, I want to add in the ability in a board to see what work is at risk of not meeting deadlines and do something about it. That's certainly a way that you can go. Just make sure that you are able to do something where like you're going to get meaningful feedback from the users you talk to. Because if you recruit more PMs and talk to them, and they have a bunch of other stuff about boards that they want to talk to you about, and they don't really care as much about like, oh, there's stuff on the board that's like at risk and I don't know that. Then if you've already decided to focus on that, those people who you talk to may not be giving you useful feedback on the thing you're trying to verify. So basically, I don't know, you've talked to like kind of two PMs right now, right? One who works for us and one who doesn't work for us. So it may be premature to narrow down on like PMs need this at this point. At the same time, timelines are what they are, right? So you kind of can't wait forever to like start converging on like this is a problem we're going to solve. So the classic answer in technology, I guess, is it depends. I don't know.
Okay.
It's kind of up to you. Everything is always a gamble. But like, I don't know, trust your gut. And I think the more important thing is like be able to have a reasonable reason that you can speak to about why you made this decision. I think that's probably the more important thing for your class, for like the project you're actually doing, for your own individual portfolios later when you present this to somebody, being able to say this is why we made this decision and why we thought it was the way to go is probably the more important thing here.
Yeah, definitely. And that's like something that we're thinking about as a group as well, just like, oh, what makes sense to go deeper into? Because we tried to like go pretty broad in our last round of interview with the questions, but oh, what are the biggest usability problems there? And then we find a lot of different things that people mention. It's a bit hard to find any convergence on any single issue. So I guess, do you have any advice for us, framing the entire research goal going into the next round of interview, since we only have access to like 5 users?
Um, well, do you have a sense of the severity of the issues that the people you've already talked to expressed? Like they're not all product managers, but for things where you got a lot of common feedback across all of them, were they like, oh, this is annoying? Were they like, it's very hard to do my job because of this thing? That may be something to dig deeper on in those follow-up PM interviews and see if that's a thing that affects them as well. Looking back at the affinity map. So you messaged it right. So a lot of these things are things that a product manager would need to do, right? So pre-labeling, they're going to be creating issues, managing the labels on things. They're going to be doing that sort of thing, allocating work for sure. They're going to be doing, depending on the way their team works. Working with epics, like a lot of this stuff is, even though most of these folks who you talk to are on the engineering side, these are common concerns for product people as well. So I think that if there are places where you're seeing like everybody we talk to or most people we talk to have issues around this, dig into that as well with these next 5 interviews to see what their problems around it are, and try to focus especially on like what does it prevent you from doing, or what does it make it hard for you to do, or what does it make it take too long for you to do in your work. If you can get specific information from them about like, I need to do X, but it's hard because of problem or deficiency Y, that's a really actionable thing, right? Where you can say it's not just that they don't like it, they can't do this thing that they need to do for their job.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we're trying to do, to just be very specific so the insights we get can be actionable. And right now, like one of the things that we worry about is that, let's say if we're like, oh, let's ask something about weight limit, work allocation, and then labeling and navigation, then we might not have time in the 30-minute interview to kind of like go through each and every one of them in depth, like in depth enough that we can kind of come up with a very detailed like ideation on.
Yeah. And I think that that's maybe okay. One thing that you could do is, if you want to make sure you have some time in that, because 30 minutes goes really fast. If you want to make sure you've got some time to do a little ideation on them with like, okay, well, how do you think this, this would work better for you, or what do you wish it did, or whatever. You probably just have to say, okay, of the things we talked about, like which of these causes you the most problems, or which of these is the most painful, which of these blocks you the most, or whatever, and then just focus on that in that session with them. At the end of the day, with like 5 additional interviews, you're not going to get broad consensus. Different people work different ways, especially with this kind of workflow. Like it's really dependent on team culture kind of thing. So they have somewhat different needs that are, mostly generalizable at a high level, but like the specific details are always going to be different. So the things that poke out to them are going to be a little different. So you're going to end up needing to do some analysis after those interviews to really say, okay, these people didn't all say the exact same thing, but like, what are the commonalities between them? What will kind of, what's the rising tide that lifts all boats here among all of these users? Or most of them, maybe not even.
Yeah, so right now,
Yeah.
we have like 2, I guess, like approaches that came up on top of my mind. If anyone else think of something else, like just jump in. So are you saying that like first approach, we can just try to ask very broad questions to these next 5 PMs, asking them about like biggest usability pain points with issue boards, asking them which one of them, I guess like 4 insights that we find impact them the most, and then like dive deeper into one of them in our interviews. And then,
I would say
or
maybe more, you've identified some pain points that people you've talked to have in common. Try to ask about those areas, but leave it open to if they've got something to tell you about that's completely different as well, because you don't want to block them from, if they've got like a burning thing, they're like, oh, I can't wait to talk to these people and researchers, I hate this thing or whatever. You don't want to make them feel like they can't share that. But it's almost, you kind of like, you want to kind of be trying to circle in, right? So you've got some clues right now, try to dig deeper on those clues. And then if there's one particular thing, which is maybe one of the things you've already heard about, or maybe a totally different thing, but that person feels is like blocking them the most, go a little deeper with them to try to get them to imagine with you how it could work differently for them, how it could better
Okay.
serve them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And
Sorry, and that was a different thing.
for that, like, can we use some of the research insights that GitLab already has, combining with within the first round?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously anything that Gina already shared with you in that issue is, fair game. That's stuff that going into this, right? That's an input that you can use. I think also now that like GitLab and Tufts have figured out the NDA situation, I don't know what changes about what we can share with you about other research stuff that we have. That's probably a to-do that we should take away from this, because there may be more extant research results we could share with you that could inform, probably not inform the interviews you're going to do, but be an additional data source to look at doing analysis and try to narrow down on where we're going to solve this. We're going to work on solving this stuff.
Yeah, and what if we interview 5 people and they all said like 5 different things about the pain points they had?
And they totally might. I think that is a situation where going to extant research that we may be able to give you access to could help, where you may be able to find something that these interviews kind of color or point to that is a larger issue to solve. I would be surprised. So you will have done 11 total, right?
Hmm?
You will have done like 11 interviews total, and this
Mhm.
kind of like figure out what the problem is
Yeah.
part. I would be really surprised if there's really just no center of feedback that comes about. But if there really is, then I think, kind of going back to like a, you know, a high school science class or whatever, that's interesting too, right? Like these people have super diverse needs. What does that mean? Why does everybody have a different problem about this? Like, is there kind of like a large set of small fixes that is necessary to adjust this for certain people's use cases? But it does seem like, you know, even if everybody says something different, if you're able to get from them, like, what's the thing that blocks you the most? You're going to have 5 things out of these next 5 interviews. At most, you're going to have between 1 and 5 things out of this next set of interviews that are like, this blocks me the most. And then looking at our user personas and looking at our extent research, you may be able to figure out which one of those is the broadest or the most applicable problem across users. You know what I mean? So like somebody might say like, I hate the way labels work, like it really blocks me, it takes up all my time. Somebody might say, I need user specific swim lanes. I just can't use this without that, whatever, you know, looking at the jobs to be done that we have to find for our users may help you determine which of those is like a bigger fix across our total user base, even if they all say totally different stuff. But they probably won't all say totally different stuff. You'll probably get in, you know, at least 2 or 3 that say the same thing weirdly, or the same thing at like slightly different levels of generality.
I have a question on that. Also, sorry, like my voice isn't great because I'm recovering from food poisoning. But
Oh, no.
one thing I'm thinking about is if we want to like narrow down to a very specific area, because we already discovered in the affinity mapping like what areas are, I guess, potentially we can make it better. Is it okay if during the interview we just be like, okay, let's only focus on, let's say, label assigning process. And then in this interview, we just only talk about label assigning process. And even though I know that maybe they have like other pain points, but then this can help us to like narrow down to a very specific point. But then I don't know if this is like, you know, professional. It's probably not.
Do you mean that you would choose to narrow down all of your interviews to that one thing, or you would choose to narrow down one specific user's interview to that one thing?
I think I'm just a little bit concerned about like the timeline. That's why I'm just thinking if I know this is not like the best way to do it, but we probably can narrow all the interviews down to one specific area to explore. But the problem is that they might also not have pain points in that area.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so you're talking about like kind of narrowing down before you do these next 5 interviews.
Yes, because I guess from the affinity mapping, we already figure out like what are some general pain points from
Yeah.
people.
I think that you can kind of sort of do that, but not all the way. So think of it this way. You're gonna do these next 5 interviews anyway. You're not gonna save time, you know, procedurally, operationally, by narrowing down the focus of those interviews. I think that you've already picked up on some problem affinities from the interviews you've already done. So it may make sense in these next 5 interviews to try to ask questions about their use of the functionalities that people have already indicated that they have some kind of common problems with. Making sure that in those 5 interviews, you're not like blocking that person from sharing totally different feedback that they may have. Because if they've got like a burning thing that's not any of these, you know, whatever, 5 or 6 things, you want to hear that from them too. And I think, you know, trying to make sure that the first part of the conversation is about, you know, getting a sense from them of like what the things they have problems with are, getting a sense from them of like what's the thing that you consider like the most blocking to you, and then digging in on that one with them. Because I think that's going to give you data back into the things in your affinity map already, right? Like, yeah, these people also that problem. It's also going to give you like some ranking, which is going to be subjective, but you know, you can try to base it in data, try to base it in like, you know, which of these it's about the way you ask the question, right? Try
Mhm.
not to ask like what bothers you the most. That's
Yeah.
but like, which of these blocks you the most, which of these prevents you from like doing your work the most, which of these causes them like takes the most time or whatever. That will give you some kind of objective ranking of like the importance of of those problems as well. And yeah, they might all say totally different things, but then at least okay, here's between 1 and 5 things that users consider to be like important blockers to achieving their work and whatever. So I think that gives you some good inputs into kind of like the analysis part where you say, okay, we've gone and asked about all the problems. Now we need to narrow down like what's the problem we're going to fix. You're going to have 11 interviews worth of raw conversation. You're going to have some ranking from users about like things that are the most problematic to them. You're going to have some of the extant research findings we've already shared. We need on our end to figure out like what else we can share with you now that the NDA stuff is worked out. So you're going to have a lot of inputs to decide. I think that, I don't know, I'm not your project manager, but a recommendation I think is like at that point, you should probably all like get in a room and like have a bunch of sticky notes and whatever, like a whiteboard and just do like a big mega affinity mapping kind of thing almost. Just to figure out like what's the thing that's going to provide that's going to like unblock the most users in the most meaningful way to address. And then just being able to like confidently say, these are the reasons based on this research that we think this is the thing to work on. And then you work on it, right? Then you come up with your designs, then you go test those with some users, that kind of thing. Then everybody's happy, everybody gets an A, product improves, it's great. So that's a long way, I guess, of saying like, yeah, you can kind of narrow down, but like don't narrow all the way down to these next 5. Try to like get more information on the problem things you've already learned about in these next 5 without blocking those next 5 from also sharing totally novel stuff.
Yeah, and then as to the problems that we learned about in the current interviews that we had, I actually don't think there was like a lot of specific pain points that people mentioned, or like if I read this wrong, like somebody jump in and correct me. But for example, like in work allocation, like there is one pain point that says there's no weight limit. Only one person mentioned this. And then the other people are basically just saying how they're currently doing work allocation. And then there are like 2 usability issues that are like kind of isolated and probably can be addressed by paper cuts if you see other things are, similar to this already. And then there are some like functionality issues. And then pre-labeling, it appeared because we kind of asked a question about automation and labeling. So that part is a legit pain point because I think that process is pretty tedious. And yeah, and then the other pain points are probably like repetitive issues like writing comments, descriptions, and things like that. But besides that, I don't think we found any other like, workflow problems or usability problems.
So for the person who said there's no weight limit, do you know what they meant by that? And did you have time with them to dig in more about like, oh, why do you need that? What do you mean by that? That sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's the interviewee that Aria and I interviewed. I think what he meant by no weight limit is that you can assign the weight from 0 to like no upper limit, but then it's hard for people to understand what the number exactly means. Because maybe a 10 to me is like a very important thing, but maybe sometimes a 5 to another person is a very important. So I guess there's no like standard of measurement to that. He's also the one who mentioned about like, I guess risk measurement in terms of like what are, how there's no risk assignment in GitLab. But yeah.
Sure. And a lot of this feedback that you got from these users are really kind of more about issues than the board itself. Which is fine also, like in the in the real world, it's very powerful when through user research, you can say, you know, we talked to a bunch of people about this thing we thought was a problem, but they all actually talked about this thing. Maybe we should work on that thing instead. You know, especially like in user research, when you get to like a senior level, especially, it's a good thing to be able to do, to be like, listen, the evidence actually points out this is a more meaningful thing to address. So, you know, it could be an interesting thing for you also. If you keep hearing things that are about issues that are not about the board per se, you know, maybe that's a place you want to look at making recommendations instead. I think that of the kind of affinity groups we've got here, list organization, issue prioritization, epics, and boards, I think are more about like the board experience, but like, you know, weight is something that I think does get shown on the card on a board, but it's not a board thing per se. Labeling is included, is, you know, involved in boards, but like when you're grading an issue, that's more about grading an issue, not necessarily about the board. So, you know, something like to keep in the back of your mind also is like, how much feedback are you actually getting from these users about boards, and how much of it is actually about issues? Or are they, you know, feedback about kind of like that whole process of like managing stuff? Yeah, I guess what I mean to say is like, we're not gonna be like mad, and you're not gonna like fail if your result is like, boards, we didn't get anything about boards, but we got something about this, and we think this is an important improvement to make. I think that shows leadership, it shows product vision, if that's the pivot that you make. All teams end up making pivots. The thing that you start out with is not necessarily what you end up with. So if it goes that way, don't worry about it. Follow the evidence, follow what looks like it's a meaningful change. I don't know if that's easy to hear or not, but
Yeah, I think, may feel free to jump in, but I feel like right now, right now we have this one direction, which is kind of interviewing the next 5 people based on different kind of signals, a problem. So for example, like labels, pre-labels, work allocation. And so I would imagine the interview guide kind of have these like different sections of these signals for pain points. That's one direction. I think the other direction that we talked about earlier in this meeting, which is, I guess, more based on like PM workflows. So the one that we talked about was task in jeopardy of deadline. One that's a little bit broader than that is kind of like planning and tracking issues. I think right now it's a little bit hard for me just because I feel like these two are kind of like, I guess, two separate directions, and I'm not super sure which one we should follow at the moment. So I think, yeah, feel free to jump in. I think the goal of this meeting mostly is to kind of decide which direction, or maybe we can blend these into one. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I want to encourage you not to narrow down on a thing to solve until you're done with this round of interviews, because this round of interviews is all about finding out what the pain points are for the users. So you're kind of prematurely optimizing, I think, if you say we're going to dig into this thing before you talk to these next set of users to hear what their problems are. But I think that this round of interviewing, the like figuring out what the problem to solve is, doesn't have to all be like just free form open to anything, right? You can be trying to invest, you've got suspects, like you're trying to investigate which of these suspects, is the one. So I think that those are a couple of different tracks of broad work to check in on in these interviews to see if it resonates with these users that like, yeah, it's, you know, A, do they do that kind of planning work? Are they setting up the board for an iteration, for a milestone and then keeping track of stuff? Or are they like constantly like getting surprised towards the end of a milestone? They're like, oh gosh, I didn't realize that thing like wasn't getting done yet. That's like at risk, that sort of thing. And I think just getting a sense from them about like what's the important delta in the experience today for them, right? What needs to be there for them to be able to achieve their job better that's not there now? And it's, you know, it might be one of those two things. It might be a different thing. You kind of don't know yet. You don't know until you've done these interviews. I think after you've finished those 5 interviews, that's when you can do synthesis on like all 11 of them, incorporating like extant research that we've been able to provide you as well. That's where I think you'd want to narrow down to like, this is the one. We think this is the one because there's evidence in these interviews we've done. There's evidence in the like past research results that says improving this thing will, you know, have the most benefit for the most users, unlock the most usability for the most users. And it can be definitely like you know, anxiety inducing to like sit with that ambiguity for a while, but I don't know, I would encourage you to like not think of it as like, oh, we need to like decide now. I would encourage you to be like, we've got 5 more conversations in which users are going to tell us, you know, give us evidence for the right direction to go. And you know, you can point out on a calendar basically once you've got those interviews scheduled about like, that's the date that we will know, is like we're going to schedule a time for all of us to get together and analyze the results of these 11 interviews or whatever, and like we're going to come out of that session, you know, with like a strong evidence-backed hypothesis about the problem to solve.
Yeah, so I guess like the research goal is more about like out of everything on issue boards, like what are the biggest problems that we should solve instead of like what is wrong with, you know, an area that we can improve on.
I think so. I mean, you know, if you, there are obviously places where you could narrow it down, but I think that the interviews you've already done were not narrowed down to this extent, so they're not going to speak to that. You could narrow it down to like, we want to make improvements to like the header bar on a board. We want to make improvements to like navigating between boards. We want to make improvements to the experience of like, we want to make improvements to the card that represents an issue on a board. Those are things you could narrow down to, but not all the interviews you've already done speak to that. And more importantly, I don't, you know, if someone asks you, why did you narrow down to that? Do you have a good reason for any of them yet?
Oh, you mean like right now?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah, I think like right now we're just curious, like if we were to narrow down something, it doesn't have to be like a feature to improve, but more like, I guess like a step within the process of using issue boards that people find frustrating. Maybe that could be something that you guys have already found in your research, and then we'll just like dive into that and see if like these 5 people have anything in common with that and how we can like improve it. But that's just like a thought right now.
Yeah. Well, how does that help if you do that? What does it improve? What does it make easier or faster or better?
Yeah, I think like it's just easier to get down to the specifics of like, oh, so what information you're looking for here and what is it missing? Like things like that. But yeah, I'm also curious how you guys usually do it, like, you know, professionally as well.
Yeah. I think it, unfortunately, it depends. But you know, broadly speaking, I think if I were actually going to do a user research project about improving boards as broadly as that, I think I would be basically doing what you've done so far. You know, I wouldn't want to narrow down prematurely on any one part of it until I've finished the part where I collect from users who I think are relevant stakeholders in this, like what are the problems that they have. Um, because you may narrow down on something that, based on some initial evidence, you think is a really important thing to solve, which may be because like internal users who you talk with find it important to their work. It may be because you personally find it important to your work, and then just because it like bothers you, and maybe they're like someone who's really loud about it, and like volume does not necessarily, you know, equal like impact. I think that, you know, you want to have an evidence-backed reason why it was important to work on this specific thing. You know, if you want to take a look at the extant research before you do these next 5 interviews to try to see, hey, this is definitely an area of like, you know, problem. Let's narrow down on that. I mean, to be clear, I'm not going to stop you no matter what you do. I'm not in charge of you. You're in charge. I think it could work if you want to do that. I guess it sounds like what you're thinking is that it helps make those next 5 conversations more focused. It helps make sure that you're actually getting usefulness out of those 30 minutes from each of those users. You know, every user interview is useful, even if you're like, oh, I did not expect that conversation to go to that place. You're going to learn really interesting stuff. So, you know, I wouldn't be worried about that necessarily. Like, you know, let's say that for some reason you didn't have any more interviews in this stage. Let's say you had to decide right now on like what you're going to narrow down on, and like you're not doing any more learning about it. You're going to start working on like a solution to test out that proposed solution. I think that the interviews you've already done speak to kind of some like clusters of potential like pain points for users. So you've got like some seeds, you know, you've got some seeds of like these are things that are maybe bothering people. You could kind of go either way, basically, I guess, is the very short answer. Like if you want to narrow down on like a specific thing, go for it. Just make sure that you have like a good evidence-backed reason that you could say to like your professor, or you could put in a slide for like, this is why we decided to narrow down to like solving this problem. I don't think you have to. I don't think you have to at this point. I think it's okay to still be collecting wide feedback in these next 5 interviews, because it doesn't just have to be, you don't have to just go down a list of like, what's your take on this? Like, what do you do for your stuff? You know, like you have kind of some like suspect things that you can try to dig deeper into in the script for these next 5 interviews. So you don't have to use the same script you use for your first steps. You can tweak it to try to make sure you're gathering feedback on the things that you think may be areas of focus, while not excluding the ability for those people to give you valuable feedback about stuff.
Then in that case, should we still ask them anything about like automating labels? Because I don't know if that's something that is already being worked on at GitLab. And our professor did say it's like kind of too small of a scope, if that would be like our final capstone project.
We do have bots that add labels. I mean, we as like GitLab, the company, has in our workspaces have set up bots that look at, I don't know, who creates an issue or a merge request, or what kind of changes a merge request contains, and adds labels like that. What we do have also, and this is more part of GitLab the product, is quick actions. I don't know if you've run across those. It's show me with your hands, if you have heard that term. Quick actions, and a linked dog, and they're basically slash commands like you have in Slack, And you can enter them in descriptions or comments across GitLab. And so, for example, one that we have is /label, and then you enter the name of the label or labels that you want to add to. I don't know where. I'll post it in chat, and maybe someone who knows where we are in the agenda can add it to the agenda. So what we also have is description templates. And so when you're creating an issue, you can select an existing description template. And so within the Markdown description template, you can have many quick actions. So this semi-automates, or it makes it easier to assign labels. You can also select a description template to be the default description template for each new issue created in a project or group. And then you can make sure, for example, each newly created issue has the label that says needs triage. And then that's as close to automation as we are with the official features.
Yeah, another example of the way that we use those automation bots internally is there are certain labels that kind of like go together. So if you add one of them, but not the other one or ones that should go with it, the bot will like automatically add the other ones. This is obviously like it's not part of the feature. It's not part of our product. Our boss, the like director of UX, has actually given direct feedback before about like, we should maybe pump the brakes on using this too much because like our customers can't use this. We're diverging from the way our customers use our product. This is so important. Maybe this is something we should work on as a feature. That work hasn't happened. So there's like, it's not that there's nothing about label automation. Label automation is not necessarily something that has anything to do with boards. So the column, the lists in a board are based off of labels. The filter that a board is might be based off of labels. But the management of labels on an issue is more a concern about issues. I am very intrigued that Linda said it might be too small scope for using Capstone. What are the what's an appropriate scope for using your Capstone? Because I also don't want to I don't want to lead you astray. I don't want to lead you to a place where Linda's like, oh, that's it.
Fadi, remember what she said? Because it was I think Thursday.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure exactly what she said, but I feel like she just expects more of something that, because I feel like the tasks that we go through in class, we have to do different ideation exercises, so like that. So I feel like she just expects something where she can kind of see something from end to end, I guess, instead of a slight modification or something. I'm not sure if I'm kind of going her
Yeah,
way.
for example, some other projects we do for the capstone class is creating an app that helps women kind of go home safely at night, or creating an app for people with spinal cord injuries to do exercise, or exploring ways for developers to use AI at Red Hat. So I guess yeah, that's the type of scope of problems.
Is it I mean, it sounds like she used the word scope specifically, but is it maybe the case that what she's looking for is kind of more like, I want it to be clear why this improves something, or why this allows a user to do a new thing kind of thing. And maybe for her, automating labels is okay, you got rid of some busy work, but that's not unlocking a new thing, or unblocking them on something that they were able to do that was blocked before.
Yeah, potentially. If anyone else has other takes too, because I think the thing that she left comments on our assignment was oh, I like to see you explore some other solutions besides just labels.
Oh no! Oh, that's what you're doing.
And so on that note, too, circling back to the comment from Amanda, don't be concerned about like, oh, is this something that like the GitLab team could actually implement within a milestone or whatever? That's not your concern. That's our problem. You really just focus on like
You're gonna pass the class. So
yeah, like you've got to come up with a thing where like it's clear that this will improve usability or this will improve, create new abilities for users in the platform. And this is our suggestion for it, and we got some feedback on it, and we improved based on the feedback that we got on our suggestion. And this is what we came up with in the end. Is like we think this would be a good improvement.
Yeah. I think
So
that's
like, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say, don't, those two pieces of advice from Amanda and from Linda are like a little bit at odds, I think. I would lean more towards making that because she's your boss,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like the whole thing about shipping is not something that Amanda proposed. It's more like, I guess like we're thinking that, oh, if this is something that could be shipped, maybe it's a validation that it actually solved real user problems.
Yeah.
And yeah, it could be something that's just actually more.
Well, listen, I will be upfront with you about it. Whatever you come up with, I am personally going to mine for anything that I can actually make changes in the product based on. So like there will be at least something from your findings that finds its way in there by hook or by crook, whether it's like a big project that they do or whether it's like, hey, here's a bunch of stuff they've had. I can at least go fix those things because I'm kind of able to operate outside of like that team's roadmap. But yeah, I think, focusing on like users couldn't do this before and now they can do this thing should be like the very basic high level story of your project. Like we figured out a thing that users needed to do, but they couldn't. And we figured out how to make it so that they can do it. Ta-da is like the 3-second version of your final presentation.
I see.
Now that said, you don't have the first part yet. And that may make you anxious. You may be feeling like, oh boy, I really need to decide on what that first part is yet. But like you still are planning on collecting evidence about it. So like you don't have to decide yet, I don't.
Yeah, and I guess when we ask questions about like issue boards, like what if somebody goes to like milestones and roadmaps? Like, is that a part of our scope? I guess how can we ask the question so that people are actually talking about the boards instead of the issues, the labels, or like milestones, epics?
The nature of these features is such that they all kind of flow into each other. So if you ask someone about their use of like Kanban boards or boards, issue boards or epic boards in GitLab, they're going to naturally start talking to you about stuff that's specific to an issue. They're going to naturally start talking about stuff that's specific to a milestone. They're going to talk about kind of adjacent stuff. I think that if you want to steer someone back to boards, you could ask something like, is that functionality something you would expect to be able to do from the board, or is that information you would expect to see on the board, just to kind of get them back to like, okay, but I want to hear about like the part where you're on this page.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Let's talk really briefly about your timeline.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about it? When is like your final thing due, by the way? I don't actually know that. I might have missed like a meeting where that got discussed, or maybe we just haven't discussed it.
Yeah, so actually. So April 29th is when we're supposed to do 2 rounds of usability testing, and so April 29th is the day where the feedback for the second round is due. So I guess that's kind of technically kind of the final part. Obviously, we'll create the final prototype and also the presentation after that, but I would imagine there'll be around that day.
Yeah, I think that's like part of the reason why we were trying to think of ways to make the prototype as evidence-based as possible. If we can make the questions more specific, then maybe we have more evidence to back up why we made a certain changes. So, yeah.
Yeah. So of the affinity groups that you already got from the 6 interviews, do you think that any of those problems is something that's like meaty enough to dig into? Or do you think it needs to be something other than that? So it sounds like label stuff, you were like worried that maybe then it doesn't like the scope of that, but like are any of these categories something where you're like, yeah, like we could totally dig in and like solve some of this stuff at this point with the interviews that you've done?
I guess maybe work allocation. But
But there isn't like a specific pain point that was mentioned. It's more like how work is allocated. And definitely things like maybe this, I don't know. And would it be like a curveball to say that, oh, what if we change our research question from how to improve issue boards or to how to improve X about issue boards?
Sorry, what was that? How to improve what about issue boards?
Yeah, like would that be a curveball to like change our research questions like how to improve something about issue boards?
Oh, X, you said. I see.
Yeah.
I mean, no. I would say it's not even a pivot, right? It's just a narrowing down. A pivot would be like, these people aren't giving us anything about issue boards, or we've decided issue boards are like too diffuse or whatever. Let's focus instead on issues. Um, that would be a pivot. That would be something you could call it. I think narrowing down is fine. You can do it. If you narrow down to something based on extant research that we have that we can provide you that doesn't really have anything to do with these 6 interviews you've already done, then these 6 interviews you've already done, we're maybe kind of a waste of your time. Which is too bad. I think you would want to make sure that the 6 interviews you have done are something you can show are like moving you forward, are like informing the decision that you make about what to work on. I think that if there's any topic that came up from the interviews you've already done that seems like something to dig further down into, then maybe you can try to focus more on that or on that set of things in the next set of interviews. I mean, also thinking about this from almost like a lab report write-up later on, it could be interesting to say too, like we did an initial round of interviews. We didn't really see any compelling feedback in that initial round of interviews. So we reassessed and decided to change our interview script or, narrow our focus or whatever. And then we did 5 more interviews with that, refined focus. And we did find this thing. I think that sounds like a very reasonable slide that makes you look smart, So yeah, I think you could do it. I think the question for me would be like, what is that focus and how do you, if someone says, why did you choose that? What's your answer? And obviously you don't know now because you don't know what it is, but make sure that you could answer that.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Is there anything that jumps out to you right now from the affinity map? Maybe something that you've encountered while working with boards in the past?
Yeah, well, okay, listen, don't like base your whole project on this. I'm one person and I'm not our user. One thing for me is like the fact that all boards are a shared view. means that like if I go to a board and then I change the lists, everybody who goes to that board sees the changed set of lists. That's something that we are actually already working on though. Saved views, like a thing that's already planned. That's something that is like a current pain point about the current version of it. Navigation between boards is weird right now because it's just a giant drop down. Those are some things that are like board specific for me, but like I don't know if like the real users you talked to spoke to any of something of that as a problem. It may also be a matter of the way that it's framed, right? It's like they might just have one board that they're working off of all the time. The nature of my specific work, I jump around between different board views a lot, so maybe that's not very typical. Yeah, I would say like for me personally, those are like things that get in my way a lot about it. And then there's just like some stuff. This is not something I think would be like. This is like I don't know. This is like not like a sexy enough sell for a Capstone project, but like there's like some feature parity stuff with like Jira or whatever that we don't have yet, but I wish we had. That's not cool or exciting as like a project where it's like, oh, we found that there's a bunch of stuff that Jira has on reports that we don't, so we should do it. It's not a compelling presentation, but there is stuff that we're missing that I wish we had. More generalized swim lanes, that's something that I think is planned. Just like, a right-click contextual menu on issues, or like more stuff that you can do on the issue, like close an issue without actually dragging to a close column. There's a bunch of stuff like that like I wish we had, but we don't. But I don't know that that's like a compelling project. And again, I'm just one user and I have like kind of a weird use case. So don't take any of that. Among the stuff that you have on your affinity mapping, I do think there's some interesting stuff about work allocation that is relevant to boards. I think that yeah, some of this is just people describing the way that they work. For like the person who said there's no weight limit for issues, I'm interested in how he would want to manage that sort of stuff. There's maybe some stuff that's issue specific there, but maybe, it would be interesting to say like, okay, well, how would you want that to affect boards? Would you want there to be like a weight limit on a list? Would you want there to be a weight limit on a swim lane, whatever? The person who said that people assign themselves to tasks, I think a follow-up question to that kind of thing could be like, well, how does that affect the board? Like, how do you wish it affected the board? Is there like different visibility into that? Like, what are the implications of people doing that for your work and the way that you organize work? Yeah, some of this is just kind of people describing the way that they work, which is okay. I think one thing that's important is you might want to pull out all of the things that people said that were descriptive of their workflow and try to model out those users' workflow. Like this user does these things. Because if you can have kind of mental models of like the way that they do their work, it can help you identify places where there are gaps. Even if they didn't necessarily call them out, then you could say like, well, okay, so this person does those things. What happens in between these two steps they didn't say? In an ideal case, you could like follow up with that person about it. We don't have time for that, I don't think, in this project, but you could ask someone else who has a similar workflow about it, or you could try to learn from someone else with a similar workflow. There's some interesting stuff here in lists organization, too many columns. Okay, how does that impact you? What do you wish it were like? This one, like they have columns that are based on labels. It sounds from this, it sounds like this person wishes they didn't have to be based on labels. Using issue boards to keep track of PRs. Why do they do it that way? What does that mean for them? I think there's some interesting stuff about list organization, list usage that you could maybe dig into, but I think trying to focus on like where is there the clearest like they want to do this but they can't, or like they've got a weird workaround. Why do they have that workaround? What's missing that requires them to have a workaround? Those are the places where there's something to go, aha, if only it worked in this way. Sorry, I run behind. I'd be unblocked, kind of thing. Also, I want to acknowledge we're 8 minutes over. I don't know if you all have somewhere to speak. I don't, but I do know it is also late in lunch instead.
I actually got the run, so
You'll catch up.
thanks, y'all.
Teamwork.
Thank you.
So I don't know if that like makes you feel better or worse as far as pep talks go, but you know, if you do want to like change up your like interview guide, if you do want to try to narrow focus on something before you do these next time interviews, I'm not going to stop you. And I think as long as you can speak to a good reason why you did it, then great. That was good on you. I don't think you have to at this point because I think that the narrowing down process can happen after you've collected all of the information. I do think that if you're worried about these next 5 interviews only being 30 minutes long and like, oops, what if we like waste one of them or waste a big chunk of all of them on stuff that didn't matter? You may still be able to address that just by adjusting your interview guide, adjusting your script without necessarily narrowing down on like, we're only focusing on this thing now. It's up to you.
Mhm.
I think the most important part is just like if someone says, why'd you do that? Be able to have a good reason for it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's definitely the most important part. Yeah, we definitely hear what you're saying. So it's like, for example, if they say the PM core workflow is to prioritize and track progress of features and bugs and align them with milestones, etc. And like our goal is just to basically find like what within issue boards is like missing for certain tasks that they want to accomplish. And like why is that?
And you know, you may also find people who are like, oh, I don't use it. And that's gold. And you're like, oh, why? And you know, it may just be that they have like different kind of workflow where they don't really need a Kanban board, or it may be that they're like kind of wish that they could, but there's just like something about it that doesn't work with the way that their teams work. So
that's helpful.
you know, don't be discouraged if they
But I guess there's just one area where I feel
don't resonate with like everything you've already heard.
partially on that for some days.
But like there's gonna be something.
Almost sharing too much of the dream and what's possible in a way that like certainly goes beyond it. You know, I mean, like we haven't entertained a conversation.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's a little bit past the time, so I think our team will kind of discuss about everything that we talked about today, and then we'll update you guys on Slack about what we decide.
I
Yeah.
will follow up to see what the NDA being signed means about additional stuff that we can share. Because that context is, you know, something in the real world you would have
Going down.
doing this kind of project.
But I heard one thing up from 150.
And if you do want to like narrow down at this point before you do these next 5 interviews, it's probably information in there that can help you. I also think it might be helpful for you if you want to post in that Slack channel and ask, I guess Ben is like your primary user researcher contact. If you want to ask him for advice on like, hey, you know, we don't really feel like we got anything compelling from these interviews. Like we're thinking about trying to narrow our focus or something for the next set of 5 interviews and this kind of like figuring out what problem to address. Like, what do you think about that? And like, he may have great advice. I'm not a user researcher, but just there's somebody who has that user research process to some site. So
I gotta like
he might have good advice.
work with his other partner that has.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the reasons why like the affinity mapping wasn't, you know, like super helpful for us right now because like we literally interviewed this one guy who uses issue board like for himself, just for his own project. So I guess like the use case and like organizational practices are like really different across the board.
Yeah, and it's, you know, to a certain extent, it's a numbers game, right? You only talk to 6 people, so you know, there's going to be some overlap, but there's not going to be like, oh yeah, like 80% of everybody said this thing. It's just,
we are
you know, small samples. But
But
anyway, I've kept you longer than we're supposed to be here, so let you all go. I'll follow up about like what we gave you now the assignment, and I recommend asking Dan about some advice for like research and focus, and have fun, good luck, happy Wednesday. See you on the internet.
But at the same time, there's a way we're gonna get to the.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.